Hello, I am Jeremy, the host of Examining Life. Welcome to episode 6 of the first European Buddhist, The Philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer is known as two things. First, he is considered the father of pessimistic philosophy. The face matches the description. Second, he was the first ever European Buddhist. Over the course of this series, our goal is to make these two lofty titles make sense. To do so, we're breaking Schopenhauer's philosophy down into parts, episode by episode. Each episode answers a key part of the puzzle in his philosophy, including, but not limited to, why you're anxious and depressed. Seriously, why no amount of pleasure is sufficient for fulfillment, why individuality is an illusion, the basis of morality, and perhaps most importantly, the way to face life in the midst of inevitable suffering. We've covered a lot so far in this series. In the first few episodes, we understood Schopenhauer's metaphysics. Then, in the past two episodes, we've thoroughly explained Schopenhauer's pessimistic claims about the suffering of the human condition. Where we left off, Schopenhauer had criticized what he viewed as the way that most people live. Schopenhauer had two primary concerns. First, Schopenhauer enlightened the insatiable nature of our will. Always desiring, always striving, but never satisfied. As far as he could tell, people are never fulfilled with what they have, so they chase after their desires like a rat on a rat wheel. His second concern was that people live under an illusion of individuality, putting a precedent on their own happiness and suffering. This leads people towards egoism and malice, which are, in reality, forms of self-harm. In this episode, Schopenhauer will go on to propose alternative ways of living that have theoretical and practical superiorities in his worldview. In this episode, expect to learn the answers to questions such as, can I ever get off the hedonic treadmill? Is there an end to suffering? What do all world religions have in common? And much, much more. Before we get to all of that, however, if you enjoy videos like this that make philosophy accessible without dumbing it down, I would really appreciate it if you could take a few seconds of your day to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It really helps small YouTubers like me who are just getting started out. Thank you. Let's get back to the video. Part 1. Mystics and desire. Schopenhauer himself was not a religious man. In fact, he was quite the staunch critic of institutionalized religion. However, that's not to say he despised everything about religion. In fact, quite the opposite is the case. When Schopenhauer looked at the world's religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on, he saw common threads of wisdom interwoven throughout their teachings. Not only did he believe that each religion sought to unveil the same fundamental ideas, but he also observed similar patterns in religious people, no matter what religion they followed. Notably, he saw that each religion had great mystics, and the ways of life that these mystics led were remarkably similar. The great mystics of all world religions, Schopenhauer noticed, had one core thing in common. They renounced desire. They all seem to observe that suffering has its root in seeking and striving. For example, the desire for status, the desire for intoxication, the desire for physical pleasure, the desire for comfort, even basic desires for food, water, and health. The concern with all these desires for mystics is twofold. First, there's a sense in which we're all enslaved to desire. If we don't practice will control, any desire that pops up is likely to overtake us until the desire is satisfied. Then, of course, a new desire pops up, and then another, and another. The second a desire for food comes up, you suffer until you satisfy that desire. So you stop what you're doing, you forget about your diet, and you eat whatever you can get your hands on. If a desire for status comes up, then you chase that, and then the next desire, then the next. I think you get the idea. If we simply chase our desires around, there's a certain sense in which we're shackled. There's something deeply childlike, even animalistic about being controlled by desires, particularly animalistic desires like those for food, sex, and pleasure. For mystics who are trying to transcend the shackles of life, refusing to follow desires is an intuitive place to start. In addition, as long as we run on that rat wheel, chasing our desires, we will suffer. Sure, there's a fleeting moment of satisfaction if we fulfill our desires, but this quickly passes us, leaving us to unhappily pursue further wishes. If you're someone like the Buddha or Schopenhauer, you see desire at the core of suffering. Therefore, if you're seeking a remedy for suffering, you're looking for any way to get off of this endless rat wheel called desire satisfaction. Part 2. The value of aesthetic experience. If you remember from way back in episode 3, I mentioned how we can transcend our own individual will. At that point, it was in the context of realizing the unity of all beings, that our apparent separateness is an illusion. To stop our own will, this constant blind striving within us, the process is fundamentally the same, at least at first. For Schopenhauer, the only relief we get from our endless pursuit of desire is when we become thoroughly absorbed in our perceptual experience, a phenomenon that happens most frequently during aesthetic experiences. For Schopenhauer, when we become absorbed in aesthetic experiences, observing the beauty of nature or listening to our favorite song, there's a split second where our experience shifts. In these moments, our ordinary individual willing ceases. Here's how I put it back in episode 3. Quote, in that split second when you're most absorbed, something happens. You forget about yourself. You forget about that fight with your partner. You forget about the dishes in the sink. You forget about the assignment due tomorrow. You forget about that back pain that was just bothering you. End quote. Your will stops. You stop desiring, you stop craving, and you stop striving. You stop feeling as though the present moment is insufficient and a genuine tranquility passes over you. Now, a natural follow-up here might be this. I understand aesthetic experiences can cause the will to pause. That's great. There's only one issue. I've had this experience, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times in my life for a few minutes at a time. I can't just listen to music and look at sunsets all day trying to stop my will. Schopenhauer would agree with this point. Aesthetic experiences for Schopenhauer get their value in reference to their indispensable role in transcendence, but they can't be the sole driver of will denial. Great works of art and music certainly aren't commonplace enough to invoke a total denial of the will unto themselves. This is where Schopenhauer makes a couple suggestions. Part 3. Contemplative practice. Meditation. First, Schopenhauer suggests some form of contemplative practice. Something like mindfulness meditation can be essential in order to basically have aesthetic experiences of willlessness within everyday life. With practice, Schopenhauer suggests that we can have aesthetic experiences with everyday objects. To do so, we simply need to pay unwavering attention to the contents of perception, such that the chattering mind silences and our consciousness becomes filled with what's actually present in the world. This idea is, of course, the driving force behind the modern Western surge of mindfulness meditation. We live in a world where it's become the norm to optimize our lives. It's become commonplace to anxiously strive for productivity 24/7. In such a world of competition, productivity, and anxious striving, people are finding it harder than ever to slow down. If you're anything like me, there's sometimes even this odd feeling of guilt surrounding relaxation. Therefore, people are looking for ways of silencing their will, ways of stopping this incessant striving. As such, mindfulness meditation has become a sort of Western cultural phenomenon in the world of self-improvement. Now, at the risk of going on a tangent, I want to say a couple tangential things. It's my YouTube channel, I can do what I want. So I've meditated a pretty significant amount. I've done several hundred hours of formal seated meditation practice, and I think I have some pretty genuine insight on this front. The first thing I want to say is that if you're meditating to try and achieve something, whether self-improvement, enlightenment, or simply a calm mind, there's a sense in which you're starting from a non-starter. What do I mean by that? This is a bit paradoxical, but I ask you to hear me out. Clearly, there is some aim to meditation, right? That aim might be a calm presence, it might be insight, it might even be enlightenment. The trouble is this. To attain the most profound insights for meditation, you can't have the target in sight. You have to give up the aim. As we talked about with Schopenhauer, true meditation is a process of stopping the will. It's a process of ceasing to restlessly strive and desire. So the paradox is this. If you meditate because you really want some outcome, you're going to be striving for it. And you cannot, by definition, attain a state of non-striving from a position of striving. Likewise, you can't stop desire through desire. You can't obtain the cessation of want through want. If you're striving for the end of striving, you're going to fail. It's a non-starter. The alternative, in my experience, is best described as a process of letting go. letting go of all of these internal vestiges of grasping, resisting, and at bottom, seeking change. Through letting go of all want, I found it possible to have consciousness resemble something like a pure reflection of present experience. In this state, whatever happens, happens, and you simply let it rise and fall without judgment. Now, if you're someone who meditates or you want to begin meditating, this might just be one of those things that you have to come to learn through your own experience. But since Schopenhauer couldn't make this point to an audience who was probably obsessed with some elements of self-betterment, I thought I'd try instead. My second brief tangent takes the form of a question. I've had some pretty meaningful experiences through meditation. Experiences where the unity of everything is overwhelming. Experiences where my sense of self as something distinct from the world ceases to appear at all. Now, the question I've frequently found myself asking is this: is this degree of insight compatible with modern life in the Western world? In other words, is it possible to maintain insights into the unity of the world while living in a society that is utterly obsessed with individuality and competition? In my experience, I've always found myself quickly swept back up into personal and societal narratives about my own selfhood. But it's entirely possible that I haven't made the sort of commitment that would be necessary to maintain these insights in everyday life. This question remains open for me. If anyone watching this has any thoughts on this question, I would love to hear them in the comment section below. To bring this conversation back to relevance, however, Schopenhauer does not insist that we have to perpetually maintain insight into metaphysical unity. Rather, he proposes another means of subduing the will. Part 4. The ascetic ideal. Besides contemplative practice, Schopenhauer suggests a sort of fight with the will. He describes something like beating the will into submission, trying to fight back against desire by voluntarily denying all desires. He suggests activities like fasting, refraining from sex, admonishing material possessions, even inflicting pain on oneself. In other words, Schopenhauer suggests a monkish lifestyle of voluntary poverty, abstinence, and fasting. This is one of the two views which Nietzsche so vehemently criticized in Schopenhauer, what Nietzsche called the ascetic ideal. Ascetic simply means severe self-discipline and refusal of all forms of indulgence. The ascetic ideal, therefore, just means something like the pinnacle of self-discipline and the pinnacle of denying all desires. It is quite right that Schopenhauer thought that this was the best way to live, even if others, like Nietzsche, judge it as nihilistic. Despite denying the idea of a highest good or summum bonum due to his essentially relative notions of good and bad, Schopenhauer says, quote, "We may metaphorically and figuratively call the complete self-effacement and denial of the will, which alone stills and silences the craving of the will, the absolute good, the summum bonum, and we may regard it as the only radical cure for the disease against which all other good things, such as all fulfilled wishes and all attained happiness, are only painkillers." Unquote. In other words, he's just saying that asceticism is the only way to end suffering. For Schopenhauer, living an ascetic lifestyle is the solution to the suffering resulting from the always striving, always desiring will. However, that does not mean that Schopenhauer thinks this is a straightforward solution that anyone can accomplish. Nor does Schopenhauer think that an ascetic lifestyle is something like enlightenment, in that once it's attained, it's completely done with. Schopenhauer considers the ascetic lifestyle a constant struggle, as we are merely manifestations of will, a will which incessantly strives. Desires keep popping up, no matter what we've done to subdue them in the past. It's the job of the ascetic person to remain mindful of their desires and continually renounce their striving will. Part 5. Conclusion. In this video, we've explained the solution that Schopenhauer proposes to our condition of suffering as a result of desire. Namely, we've explored the wisdom that Schopenhauer extracted from religious mystics. Then we explained two strategies used by mystics of these traditions. The first method is basically just mindfulness meditation, a contemplative practice of absorption into present experience as a means of silencing desire. The second method, what we called asceticism, is the voluntary denial of all desires. This includes methods such as fasting, sexual abstinence, and more. Now, if you've been extra attentive, you may have noticed that we only addressed one of the two sources of suffering that we discussed in last episode. The source of suffering we haven't properly addressed yet is the illusion of individuality. Luckily, Schopenhauer's response to this source of suffering will be the focus for the remainder of the series. The rest of the series will be really, really good. We're officially making the transition here to Schopenhauer's moral theory, a theory that is absolutely fascinating. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. To stay up to date with future episodes, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for post notifications. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments section below. I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as I can, and I'll see you next time.